Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, sponsored in part by The Pursuit of Wisdom, a series of short online free courses presented by Ave Maria faculty. Begin your learning journey at the Pursuit of Wisdom app or go to thepursuitofwisdom.org. I'm your host, Michael Dauphinais, and for this episode, I've chosen to share with you a talk that I recently gave on how to be social without losing your soul. Love, friendship, and the future of being human. I had the opportunity to give this talk at the Seek 2025 Annual Focus Conference. That's the conference of the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. And the positive response that I received to the talk was particularly encouraging, especially those who shared that it helped them understand what's going on and what's going wrong today in so many parts of our society, but also how we could respond effectively and in faith to find deeper and more meaningful relationships with one another and with God. And I wanted very much to share this talk with the audience of the Catholic Theology Show. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode. Well, welcome here this afternoon. I am so excited to be able to share with you really what I've been able to learn through my 30 years of studying theology. I came back to the faith in 1992 and came back to the Catholic Church in 1994. Anyway, I'm just a recovering, I'm just another person who's trying to find his way with the beautiful faith that we have. So I want to begin with a quote from Hamlet. Hamlet asks, to be or not to be? That is the question. Well, what I want to share with you today is something that I learned, which is that Hamlet asked the wrong question. The question is not to be or not to be. The question is how to be. And only when we discover the skills and knowledge of how to be, of how to live, will we be able to make the choice to live and to see life as a gift and not as a burden. Now, I'd like to thank Ave Maria University for sponsoring this session and for inviting me to speak at Seek this year. I prepared this talk based upon a course that I developed at the university called Love, Friendship, and the Future of Being Human. I developed that course because what I saw was students who loved learning theology and they loved learning about the humanities had a hard time connecting it to their day-to-day lives. And what I began to see is that the great figures of Plato, Aristotle, Dante, Boethius, Aquinas, they weren't writing to get jobs. They weren't writing to become academics. They were writing because they had figured out how to be, how to live, and to share that experience with others. And what I've seen in my own life and the young people that I know in my family and extended family and the young people I teach is that increasingly today people are discouraged. They feel a lack of confidence in how to be, in how to live. I know that many of you could share lots of your own experience, strength, and hope. What you've learned from your successes, your failures, your mistakes, your resetting in your relationships about how to live well and how to be social without losing your soul. I want to give you a highlight of what ultimately do I have to say today. Fundamentally, it is this. We have lost our way. We have lost the skills of how to live. And we have become increasingly bad at passing on this knowledge to others. The only way to live is Jesus Christ. For Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus Christ is divine providence, the eternal plan of God creating us and rescuing us from sin and death and for bringing us to the Father in heaven. Apart from him, we can do nothing as it says in John 15. Apart from him, we cannot be social without losing our soul. Apart from him, we have lost how to live, how to be, and so have become discouraged, disenchanted, and disconnected from our own lives and the lives of others. Having lost how to be, we increasingly find life a burden and increasingly lose the courage to be. Now, I'm going to walk through some statistics and data about our current situation so we can learn what's going on and what's going wrong. Then I'm also going to tell some stories from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, one of my favorite courses I also get to teach at Ave, in order to show how that some of our present problems and present conditions go much deeper. And they require more than a technological solution. They require a spiritual solution. Finally, I want to go over 7 practices that I want to offer for you for recovering how to be, the habits and virtues that we need to learn in order to recover joy and peace. What ultimately is going to be the key to learning how to live? It is a recovery of trust in divine providence, a radical trust in God's providential hand, radical acceptance, radical gratitude, and radical courage. What is radical acceptance? It means accepting another person, myself, in a situation so completely I don't need it to be different. What's radical gratitude? It means thanking God for what's happening now so completely I don't need it to be different. What's radical courage? It means being willing to act and engage and work and worship right now in the current circumstances I'm in without needing them to be different. There's a great line at the end of the last battle when Jewel the unicorn is facing his last night and the last battle. And he says this, thank you. Or he says this, if Aslan gave me the choice, I would wish for no other life than the life I have lived, and no other death than the one to which I go now. So now, let's go. So where are we? What's going on and what's going wrong? Well, a lot is going wrong. Over the last 10 years, this is a study by the Center for Disease Controls, the CDC, from 2011 to 2021. The numbers of teens in high school who report persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness went up from 30 to 40%, 2 out of 5. Persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. From 17 to 20% went up those who have seriously considered attempting suicide. And by the way, if you ever are working with someone or you yourself struggle with this, I would always encourage people to know the suicide hotline number, 988. So there's something going wrong. We are no longer passing on the skills of how to live. There's a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And he calls it The Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And this is what he says is the central claim of his book. 2 trends are going on. Overprotection in the real world. Parents overly involved. As Father Mike Schmitz, he says we no longer have helicopter parents. We have Zamboni parents, right, that are out there clearing the ice before their child gets there. Right. Over-involvement in the real world and under-protection, under-involvement in the virtual world are the major reasons why children born after 1995 became the anxious generation. The ages of 9 to 14, he identifies this pre-adolescence, right, as a time of deep emotional and intellectual development. And the key to the development of young people, of human development during these ages, is play. It's unstructured, unsupervised play and informal interactions with one another. That's how we discover life is interesting. That's how we learn to navigate relationships, how to work through a conflict, right? How to work through somebody who's frustrating, annoying, how to be called out when you're frustrating and you're annoying, right? Play is the way we do this. But we are increasingly unable to do that. Right? What is happening is that instead of this one-on-one way of learning with other people. At 9, typically the person is thrust into an online global world that's disconnected, disembodied, disincarnate. No longer do I have to figure out how to play fair and work with a handful of people, 5 to 10 people in my family, 50 to 100 people in my school or local area. Now I'm trying to somehow make sense of 500 million people, or I'm interacting all the time with my cohorts, right? I can't get away from them because they are always with me. And so he says, Gen Z was the first generation in history to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away from the people nearby and into an alternate universe that was exciting, addictive, subversive, unstable, and unsuitable for children and adolescents. He describes this as that we designed a fire hose of content that was addictive, that entered into the minds of children's eyes and ears and displaced the physical play and in-person socializing. These companies have rewired childhood and changed human development on almost an unimaginable scale. He quotes, according to surveys, the heaviest users of online media were the most depressed, while those who had more time in face-to-face activities among sports teams, religious communities, were the healthiest. What are increased signs of troubles? Well, here he identifies this is the percentage of undergraduates diagnosed with a mental illness. From 10% in 2012 to 2020, it went from 10% among anxiety to 24%. Depression went from 10% to 20%. These statistics had been static basically for about 30 years. Globally, the phone was adopted. The iPhone came out in 2007. But by basically 2011 or 12, it was pretty much ubiquitous. Childhood went from in person to online. Those same years, you can see across the globe, an increase in distress. Here's another one, major teens with major depression. Girls went up from 12% to 28% around the same time, 2012. Boys went from 5 to 12. Unless you think the girls are doing better, it turns out that boys complete suicide at about 3 to 4 times the rate of young women. So, right, we have a problem. We have what one documentary has called Childhood 2.0. Childhood 2.0 describes the way it is that many young people today scroll for hours on end. Young folks, as they put it, have their reward sensitivity and their social sensitivity develop before their ability of their brain to regulate these areas. Right? A 10-year-old knows what it's like to find pleasure and comfort and alleviation from distress. And also a 10-year-old is intensely socially aware of wanting to fit in and being worried about being excluded. When you give somebody access to rewards and to a kind of manufactured social belonging, they really can't say no. They're increasingly scanning the situation. Again, as I mentioned before, we're really designed to be part of a family, maybe of 5 to 10 people, a small local community of interacting with 50 to 100 people. We see everyone, we know everyone. We're constantly scanning to understand how we fit in. Now stick that into a group of 500 to 1,000, of 5,000 to 10,000. Well, what's a 10-year-old to do but to become constantly worried about fitting in, belonging, being excluded? And at the same time, that 50 to 100 people that you went to school with are now in your bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. They're with you on Saturday morning. Bullying has always been a problem, but people now can bully 24/7. Right? That's never happened before. So this is, of course, a major challenge for us. Now, what I want to highlight then is what happens then, and this is, by the way, a case for social media, news media, any online media. Right? It can be even people who don't use their phones, but just if you watch news, 24/7, if you go visit your aunts or uncles or your grandparents, right? And it's just always the news all the time. I'm constantly being informed by and aware of situations that are totally outside of my control. What happens at the same time is online interactions render us less skillful at doing this. This is The Social Dilemma by Netflix, interestingly, which only complains about social media, but not Netflix. Anyway, there's a whole nother good argument for banning Netflix, or at least banning binge watching. But what it mentions is a key thing, is that there's an element of addiction and commercialism that is at work here. If you're not the product, you're paying for the product. What is the product then? Your attention is being bought and sold by companies that are manipulating your media and your feeds in order to keep you online so they can sell your attention. More importantly, they sell your attention by keeping you distracted. The more distracted you are, the more you stay on. In this documentary, Facebook describes how they developed the like button so that people would find it more addictive. How can you not want to be liked? How can you not want to like other people? How can you not want to dislike what others do? It's addictive. It's scrolling. Even the way that the intermittent reinforcement, you get boring. Oh, exciting. It's like a slot machine. It's a process addiction. These were designed for this. Now, what's also happening is amidst where this 24/7 connection, so-called online, we're developing an epidemic of loneliness. The CDC in 2023, the Surgeon General declared an epidemic of loneliness. It writes here, the rates of loneliness among young adults has increased from every year from 1976 to 2019. We can see here there's been a friendship recession. In 1990, 1 out of 3 people had 10 or more friends. Now it's 1 out of 8. In 1990, 1 out of 7 people had 3 or fewer, and now it's 1 out of 3. We have fewer relationships, fewer friendships. Interestingly, by the way, this data also parallels declines in church attendance, which is not terribly surprising. If we stop attending church, we're going to have fewer relationships. If we stop believing in God and fostering that, we're going to feel more lonely. Kind of in a way, the statistics prove what we are proclaiming at Seek, right? Is that we actually need Jesus, right? We need our faith. Now, one interesting thing is that all in all, church attendance has been declining over the last 30 years, but there are 2 exceptions. One are millennials, basically 30 to 40-year-olds, are now attending church at higher rates than older people, right? Which is awesome. And the other thing that's exciting is that now, for the first time, men under 30 are attending church more than women under 30. Right? So we have this phenomenon of being alone together. Sherry Turkle says that technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. The way I put this when I teach this book is I say that we are so hardwired for connection that we will connect with hard wires, and we will connect across hard wires. And she describes online connections are perfect because they're like the Goldilocks Principle. They're under our control. We're neither too close nor too far. We can always just stay a little bit in touch with people, but we're never really vulnerable, but nor are we ever really in genuine communion. Always connected, rarely intimate. Always aware, rarely experiencing love. Now, I want to highlight a key theme, which is that I paid a lot of attention to our contemporary situation, and I do think we need to be aware of it in our own lives and in the lives of others. right? This is really a tsunami of mental health declines, of addiction, of suicidal activity, and we need to be prepared for it. That being said, many of the commentators that I've been looking at here don't get a key issue, which is that this is more than a technological problem. This is a problem that goes to the human soul. Now, C.S. Lewis, when he writes on Hamlet, which was written by Shakespeare in about 1600, this is what he says about Hamlet. The characters of Hamlet are all watching one another, forming theories about one another, listening, contriving, full of anxiety. The world of Hamlet is a world where one has lost one's way. Just imagine, bring C.S. Lewis or Shakespeare or Hamlet into today's world. What would they see? Well, people watching one another, forming theories about one another, listening, contriving, full of anxiety, a world where one has lost one's way.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University and sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle. Through their generous donations of $10 or more per month, Annunciation Circle members directly support the mission of AMU to be a fountainhead of renewal for the Church through our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. To learn more, visit avemaria.edu/join. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
There's a bigger problem here than merely our phones, even though our phones are part of the problem. Now, Pius XI, in 1929, so 100 years ago, by the way, there's no TV at this time, there's no iPhone. Radio was just beginning to have widespread adoption across Europe and the United States in the 20s. And he says, our age is oppressed by a most grave disease. He calls it a disease of levity and thoughtlessness, constant and passionate absorption in external things. Just listen to him as if he's describing our own society. The insatiable thirst for riches and pleasures that weakens and extinguishes in our minds the desire for more excellent goods. We get entangled in fleeting things and we forget about God and eternal things. Fundamentally, we forget about God's goodness, his mercy, and his providence. So in 1929, Pius XI thought that our world was so obsessed with the external and the temporary and the fleeting that he said that all priests and religious must go on an annual retreat following the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and encouraged, by the way, lay people to do the same. So in many ways, whatever problem we have, if you agree that there's a problem, the remedy in part is going to be spiritual exercises, little retreats, a digital and social detox. But of course, even before Pius XI, there was Jesus. Jesus says the eye is the lamp of the body in the Sermon on the Mount. Right? What does this mean? It means that our attention determines what we see. Our attention determines what we see. He says you cannot serve two masters. You can't serve God and money. Money is the ability to see and manipulate the external world according to my ego. The more I see money, I can't see God. The more I see my ego, I edge God out of the picture. So this is more than a technological disease. It's a spiritual malady. It's an intellectual obsession. And often it's a physical bodily allergy. We need healing to be put with ourselves. We need a new set of spiritual exercises. Now, what I want to highlight here is I want to go through some examples from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia to help kind of identify how we can notice, right, what's going on and how do we re-identify ourselves in Christ. Well, I want to begin with the story of Eustace. Eustace Clarence Scrubb. Lewis introduces him in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. If you haven't read the Chronicles of Narnia, don't worry about it. I not only, of course, many of the students in my class do the reading, but I have learned that not everyone does. So I'm good at telling a story for all of everyone present. Right. But Eustace, Clarence Scrub, who said he was almost deserved that name, right? He's a modern young man who's being educated in a modern school, right? The school does not, he has parents, he doesn't call his parents mom and dad, he calls them, right, Harriet and Alberta, right? He's being raised in kind of a postmodern way. And he goes back to Narnia, he's on a ship, and he looks at everyone the whole time and he criticizes them. He's in a way trapped in a world of social media, looking at everyone and not being a part of everyone. So much so that when he ends up on an island, well, he sees a dragon dies, he imagines that he's killed the dragon, and he ends up going to sleep, and when he wakes up, turns out he's a dragon. Now, a dragon, of course, is not just any animal, but a dragon is the symbol of Satan, right? A dragon is the ancient serpent. It's sin. And so this is what happens. Eustace looks in the water on this island. As he bent towards the water, he thought for a second that yet another dragon was staring at him out of the pool. But in an instant, he realized the truth. That dragon face in the pool was his own. Eustace saw himself for the first time. Instead of looking at everyone else and noticing their faults, he saw himself in his own reflection, and he saw that he was a dragon. Sleeping on a dragon's hoard, as he puts it, with greedy, dragonish thoughts, had turned him into a dragon. But the moment he became a dragon, he then saw himself for the first time. And he saw that he wanted to be friends. He wanted to get back among humans and talk and laugh and share things, right? To be social. He realized that he was a monster cut off from the whole human race. An appalling loneliness came over him. He began to see that the others hadn't been so bad after all, and he began to wonder whether or not he himself had been such a nice person as he always supposed. What's in a way one of the problems with being social is that we're dragons. But we don't see that we are dragons. We think everyone else is. But what happens here is that he has to actually become a dragon in the story, and then he sees himself as he is. Then he actually describes this as the pleasure, quite new to him, of being liked and of still more liking other people, right, was what kept Eustace from despair. G.K. Chesterton once wrote a book called What's Wrong with the World, and he had a 2-word answer, right? I am. Mother Teresa was one time asked, what's the hardest thing, what's the biggest obstacle that the missionaries of charity face? And she says, right, my own sins and failings. Now, what happens, of course, Eustace discovers he's a dragon, but a dragon can't stop being a dragon, and a dragon can't get off the island. So what does he do? Well, he tells the story about how he stopped being a dragon. And on this time, he meets a great lion named Aslan, who's a Christ figure. And Aslan says to him, there's a pool. You go bathe in the pool and you will be cleaned. But to do so, you have to take your dragon skin off. So Eustace says, well, how can I take off a dragon skin? And maybe it's like a snake skin. I can scratch it off. So he scratches it off and it comes off and it lies down next to him. But when he goes to the pool, he's a dragon again. So he scratches it off again, pulls the skin off, puts it next to him. He goes down to the pool. He's a dragon again. Does it a third time. And then he realizes that Aslan says to him, you will have to let me undress you. He says this, I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was desperate now. So I lay down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep, I thought it had gone right into my heart. Lewis is very precise, right? It's like, that's the problem. My ego can't fix the problem with my ego. If I did, I would only be more proud of myself, that I, unlike everyone else, was able to fix myself. And then I would be even more unbearable to others and to myself. We have to hit that wall where we realize we cannot fix ourselves. Right? Lewis says in Mere Christianity, he says that faith is fundamentally the admission of our own bankruptcy, the bankruptcy of our own efforts. So this tear of Aslan that went right into our heart, he began pulling the skin off. It hurt worse than anything he'd ever felt. But then, of course, Aslan throws him in the water, and he's born again as a boy. He's no longer a dragon. And this, of course, right, is the key to understanding the fundamental problem, right, with social online news media, is that we're the problem. We're dragons. And by the way, of course, so are other people. Now, as we go on in the story, I want to look at another character, Lucy. Lucy, of course, is, if you know anything about the story, she's kind of the hero of the story, the one who always does the right thing, who believes in Aslan right away. But it turns out Lucy, too, is also subject to, right, what we would call venial sin, concupiscence. So in this story, they have Lucy gets a spell book. Just imagine, by the way, if the spell book basically is kind of Lewis seeing in advance what would be on YouTube and social media in the future. Do you want an infallible spell to make beautiful her that uttereth it beyond the lot of mortals? And she imagined being adored by everyone for being so beautiful, especially more beautiful than her older sister, who was more beautiful than she, right, of whom she had been jealous. Even Lucy has a little dragon in her, the desire to be adored and the desire to get back at her sister. It goes on further. What about another spell that would let you know what your friends thought about you? What do we really want? We want to know what others think about us, but we want others to like us. We want to find our validation and meaning by having the approval and appreciation of others. What does, in a way, online media do but allow us just to look at others and hear what they're thinking about us? But this, of course, it turns out, as Aslan will say to her, I think you've been eavesdropping. Right? Eavesdropping is listening to a conversation that you're not a part of. How many people have had a conversation reported back to them by another party? Have you ever reported back another thing? Well, what happens in the story, she sees the conversation and she loses a friend. But as what happened, Aslan says this, right? Says that you misjudged your friend, right? She wasn't talking with you because she wasn't talking about you because she doesn't like you, but because she was weak. But now that you heard it, she was afraid of the other girl and said what she did not mean. Eavesdropping is dangerous because gossip is dangerous. Aquinas says that gossip is one of the worst verbal sins because it erodes the joy of friendship. How many times has a friendship been wounded because of something we overheard? Secondhand, third hand. But of course, one of the interesting things that this story, Aslan comes in, stands behind Lucy. Lucy turns around and just listen to the way Lewis describes this. Her face lit up for a moment, but of course she didn't know it. She looked almost as beautiful as that other Lucy in the picture. She ran out with a cry of delight and her arms stretched out. Lucy is called to be beautiful, but she's called to be beautiful when she looks at the source of her beauty, the beautiful one who is Aslan. We are called to want to be beautiful, but not to be beautiful to be adored, but to be beautiful because we adore. Now, one other scene with Lucy, at one time there's a darkness, a fear that overcomes everyone. And Lucy says, Aslan, Aslan, if ever you loved us at all, send help now. She says the darkness didn't get any lighter, but she began to feel better. And eventually she sees a light, she looks along the light, and she hears the albatross Aslan speak to her, courage, dear heart. There are many times when we're going to be overwhelmed by fear. And the best thing to do is not try to solve it on our own, but to say, right, Aslan, Aslan, if ever you loved us at all, we need help. Now, I want to look at one last character from the Narnia stories, Reepicheep. And Reepicheep is a valiant mouse. There he is in the picture, standing next to Eustace the dragon. But he says this, Where sky and water meet, where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, reap a cheap. To find all you seek, there is the utter east. We have a desire within ourselves for relationships that will never be realized in this world. And we can either look at that and then become discouraged or cynical about relationships, or we can realize we were created for a relationship with God more than this world. I'm going to go on a little bit here to one other author who describes this theme. Now, this is Auden, who's William H. Auden, who writes this poem in this Christmas oratorio. But I just want you to listen for a moment. The garden is the only place there is, but you will not find it until you have looked for it everywhere and found nowhere that is not a desert. Now remember, the garden, of course, is what we were created for, but the garden is not merely plants and paths. But the garden is when we are in relationship with one another and with God and with ourselves. You will not find true communion is the only thing there is, but you will not find it until you have looked for it everywhere and found nowhere that is not the absence of the communion we seek. It's in the very inability of our contemporary human relationships that we discover that we are called for a deeper communion. We can learn to reframe, in a way, our frustrations and loneliness as a sign that, right, we are created for a world beyond this world. Lewis would say, right, the fact that no human relationship or experience will ever satisfy is an evidence, right, that we were created for more than this world. Now, I want to go through some recommendations, suggestions, spiritual practices for recovering love, friendship, and the future of being human. I want to give 7 Ds for recovery. I'm going to talk about detoxing digitally, dragons, dating, detaching, desiring, despairing, and divine providence. So the first thing I want to talk about is digitally detoxing. Scrolling is addictive. Checking in on others is so hardwired in us we can't stop doing it. I want to know how my children are, how my grandchildren are. I want to know what's happening in the Middle East. Right? I'm bored. Right? When I gave up social media and news media during Lent, I would somehow still take out my phone by accident, but I wouldn't look at anything other than the weather, which just gets boring after about 2 minutes. Right? But if we are not actively detoxing, we are actively toxing. Right? All of this is intoxicating to us because it exploits our fallen DNA. We have to admit that even if maybe sometimes we're Eustace, trapped with online addictions from which we need to detox and get spiritual help, or we are like Lucy, still trapped by online addictions, just of a gentler nature, from which we need to detox. We need to go on a 28-day dopamine fast. If you can't do 28 days, try, 2.8 days. If you can't do that, try 2.8 hours. If you can't do that, try 28 minutes. If you can't do that, try 2.8 minutes, where you simply put the phone down and turn it off. Right? Interact with another person. Use the phone. If somebody texts you, call them. If you see something on social media, text the person or call them. Use the media to re-engage in immediate relationships. Right? When you're out at a restaurant, put the phones away. Right? Learn to interact without the phone being on the table. All right, all of these different things. It's so important. Sometimes we have to remember, we have to move a muscle to change a thought. Go out and look at the stars. Go out for a walk and breathe the air. Now, second point is dragons. Second D, right? We have to admit that we are dragons, or at least dragonish at times. Sometimes the relationships and the problems that we have and the misunderstandings we have are simply our fault. We probably contribute to them. But we also have to remember that it's not surprising that we have a hard time with relationships because other people are also dragons or dragonish at times. We have to give up the illusions that in a certain sense relationships should be easy. Dragons have a hard time being friends with one another. Lewis says, by the way, that part of the reasons why you rarely see dragons together is because they tend to eat one another. Actually, we have gators in Florida at Ave Maria a lot. And the most dangerous thing to a baby gator, of course, is being eaten by a bigger gator, which is one way of dealing with a food problem. But it's like this is what dragons do: is we eat one another, we devour one another verbally. So we just have to recognize it's going to be hard work, right? But once you admit that, you realize, oh, that's why it's hard. It's not hard because I'm a bad person. It's just hard because this is hard life. We have to use Q-tips more often, right? Quit taking it personally. Let our egos get out of the way. Human beings have a tremendous capacity for resilience and recovery. We have to learn how to stop reacting to crises and to start responding to others. Now, the third D I wanted to mention is dating. And here I want to say, date your friends. Now, this isn't exactly what you think, right? What I want to say, though, is we need to cultivate purposeful and planned activities, right? Invite your friends out on a date, your close friends, your acquaintances. Plan a play date with each other. Right? Say, do you want to be friends? Do you want to hang out more? Can we do something together? Let's go for a walk. Now, if you go back to Jonathan Haidt's The Social Anxious Generation, it was the period of play that many of us lost. That period of interacting and play that we lost. Let's recover it. Play embraces mistakes. It's okay to do things wrong. When you're trying to make friends with one another or invite people to Bible studies or go to a Bible study, sometimes you're going to make mistakes. You're going to hurt other people's feelings. Other people might hurt your feelings, right? But you got to break a lot of eggs to make an omelet, right? Don't worry about it. Let your feelings get hurt. Be willing to hurt other people's feelings. You can make it through it, and so can they, right? C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves says that among Christian friends, we actually can remember that we're not the ones making the play dates. Jesus is the master of ceremonies, calling us together. Not because we're special, but because there's some beauty in us that can only be revealed to another friend. And Jesus, in a way, has chosen us for one another. Remember that when Jesus sent out the disciples, right, he sent them out without money, without a sword, right, without money or protection, but he didn't send them out alone. He sent them out 2 by 2 with a friend. I've been doing a men's group, by the way, for Opus Dei for like a dozen years. But the beautiful thing, I do it with another friend. So my friend Gabriel and I do this once a month, and we've been doing it for 10 years. But the beautiful thing about having a friend, if I'm feeling discouraged, I have a friend to support me. And if it's going well, I have another friend to credit, so therefore it's not dangerous to my ego, right? It's such a blessing. So again, have play dates with one another. Now, fourth, I want to mention another D, which is to detach with love. Now, this can upset some people. People don't think we should detach from our friends. But I think we need to detach. I think we can often be overly controlling or enmeshed in other people's lives. We have to detach with love in order to learn how to love with healthy attachment. And what's the key to healthy attachments? Well, what it means is that we recognize that I have responsibilities to others, but I am never responsible for others. Each person has to give their own response to the world, to their lives, to God. You will have some people that will grow in their faith through your relationships and others who will turn away. Right? That's okay because we're not responsible for the outcomes. We're responsible for showing up. We can let go and let God be in charge. Right? Lord, as I pray sometimes, before they were mine, this could be my friends, my children, they were yours, and I put them in your hands. 5, desires. Right? What do we really desire? And we have to admit that often what we really want is to be liked, right? To like others, to have things go well. And we just have to ask Jesus to help us desire more. Help us to desire him and him alone. St. Therese of Lisieux would say, the world is thy ship and not thy home. We like the world and we like the ship, but it's not our home. So let's try to foster a desire for more. 6, despair. Now, actually, this is a 6th and 7th, but it's 6. It's just, there's 2 D's here. Don't despair. Don't despair. Be aware of our current situation. Be as cunning as serpents, Jesus says, but be as innocent as doves. Right? Be as wise about what's going on in our world, but be hopeful and joyful like children who trust in their Father. Banish worry, banish despair, banish regrets and resentments. Worry is about something in the future that hasn't happened yet. Resentments is something in the past that can't be changed. Replace them with joy and hope in our current situation. Aquinas will say that hope does not rely on our own intelligence, our own virtues, our own skills, which will quickly lead us back to despair, but hope relies on God's omnipotence and his mercy. He is all powerful and all merciful. Joan of Arc said, I do not fear. I have God, my Lord, who will know how to clear my path. It was for this that I was born. By the way, it's cool. I'd already written this when I found out that Joan of Arc was the patroness of Seek 2025. And I want to say to you, you were born for this moment. Yes, we are in a troubled generation and you were born for it. Jesus said when he looked on the crowds, right, he said that they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, and he had compassion on them. When you see others who are enslaved to their phones, have compassion on them and know that Jesus is. When you discover that in yourself, remember that Jesus has compassion on you when you are harassed and helpless. And so remember, in a way, that Jesus chose you to be born exactly when you are, and he chose you to be here today. So we can say, like Joan of Arc, I do not fear. I have God, my Lord, who will clear my path. I was born for this. And this don't despairing, I want us then to look a little bit at this theme of remembering, right? Who has rescued us? Well, this beautiful image of the icon of the Anastasis, the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus in this image, in this icon, is grabbing Adam and Eve. Right? He descends into hell. We always wondered what happened to Adam and Eve. Jesus rescued them. Right? He descended into and he preached to the prisoners. And this is what it reminds us. We may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. Right? Jesus holds Adam and Eve. Jesus holds everyone who has trespassed, who has walked out of the garden. So we have Jesus, who is the resurrection, but we also have his hands holding the hands of Adam and Eve. And you can see the way he holds Eve, right? With his hand that has been wounded. And here we see it again. Jesus not only holding Adam and Eve and rescuing them, but rescuing us. At the very bottom of the picture, by the way, you can see Satan bound. Jesus says that when a strong man guards his house, the house is fine. But when one stronger than he comes, then he will bind him. Satan has power, but Jesus has more power, and Jesus has bound Satan, and that's why he can rescue Adam and Eve. Jesus can bind Satan in your life and in mine and grab us out of it. How do we be social without losing our souls? Well, recognize that Jesus is our friend. I have called you friends. We were dragons, but now we are friends. Last, D, divine providence. I just want to look a little bit at this theme of what Hamlet says at the very end, the readiness is all. The readiness is all. There are times in my own life when loved ones have struggled with addictions, with suicide, with things that I would never have imagined I would have gone through. And I didn't know how to go through them. But I knew that the only thing that would get me through it was trusting in God. Everything is happening just as it's meant to, and God will bring good out of it if I let him. When my loved one I had a son who was struggling with addiction and suicidality and multiple attempts. And I remember one time, after another one, and not knowing what to do, I simply said, I am willing to accept any and all outcomes, up to and including the death of my son. Because as long as I was resisting that, I was incapable of actually being present, right, and learning to help the situation. So this trust in divine providence has to be total and complete. C.S. Lewis says this about Hamlet. We've already seen how in Hamlet, everyone has lost its way. They're looking at one another, conspiring. But he says at the end of Hamlet, that was actually in Act 3, to be or not to be. But by Act 5, he says that Hamlet has found his way again. When Hamlet, before he goes into battle, he says, I don't want to predict the world. I don't want augury, right? To know divinization. If I will die, I will die. If I will not die, I will not die. The readiness is all. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. Right? That's it. The readiness is all. So I want to remind you, Jesus said the eye is the lamp of the body. And we've seen what happens when we take our eye off of God and we attend simply to others, to the online distractions. We need to recover spiritual exercises, daily retreats of prayer, and prayer. Like Eustace, when we look in the mirror and see ourselves as dragons, well, maybe we have been behaving in a dragonish manner. And maybe we need to hear the words of Jesus say, you will have to let me undress you. Right? Let us admit our powerlessness to cure our own sins and to remove our shame. And ask Jesus to do what we can't do for ourselves. Like Lucy, let us admit that often we make our lives harder because we want to be adored. And we want to know what others think about us. But like Lucy, let us also say, Aslan, Aslan, Jesus, Jesus, if ever you loved me, send help now. And then let us hear Jesus say, courage, dear heart. Like Reepicheep, when we feel overwhelmed and sad, let us remember that we are made for another world. Doubt not, Reepicheep, to find all you seek. So I want to challenge you to go back to that radical trust, radical acceptance, radical gratitude, radical courage. Dante would say, in his will is our peace. So in closing, I want to thank Ave Maria University for sponsoring this session and for sponsoring a booth here in Seek for the Mission Way. I hope you've enjoyed some of our Florida sunshine, even more beautiful on a day of slush and snow. Hope you've enjoyed our coffee and donuts. I hope you'll consider listening to the Catholic Theology Show, where I try to explore these hopes and this importance. And let us just close with a prayer, by the way, in the genuine peace of the one who loved us and restored us to proper social life. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. St. Joan of Arc, pray for us. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Catholic Theology Show. Thanks, and God bless.